Welcome to another episode of B2B Marketing Futures. For years, B2B teams have been told to chase intent signals. Who is searching, who is researching, who is showing signs that they might be in market. And of course, intent matters, timing matters, but the problem is that intent alone doesn't tell you whether an account is actually worth your effort. A company can show intent and still be a poor commercial fit. They might be too small, too complex, in the wrong market, missing the right use case, or unlikely to convert into a high-value customer. So today we are going to explore a different starting point. What makes an account fundamentally a good fit before it ever shows buying signals? And we will talk about this with Tom and Sarah Lee. And I would love you to introduce yourselves. Maybe, Sarah Lee, would you like to give a sentence on yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me, first of all. Very excited to be here. I am Sarah Lee. I am based at the Stockholm office at Adyen. We are a financial technology platform, and I work as a demand generation manager and have been here for almost 6 years now. I'm working on a daily basis with trying to figure out this whole thing. So yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Tom.
Yes, I'm Tom. I am the Senior Digital Marketing Manager at AudioEye. We are a digital accessibility compliance platform, essentially helping companies be compliant with different accessibility laws in North America and in the EU. My day-to-day is managing paid acquisition. So investing, allocating our budgets towards channels that bring revenue.
To start, I want to ground the conversation in the first principle here, because a lot of targeting still begins with fairly basic filters, like company size, industry, geography, job title, maybe a few technographic or figmographic signals. But in reality, fit is usually much more nuanced than that. So let's start there. What makes an account a generally good fit before it ever shows buying intent?
I think for us, it's really dependent on where we are focusing at the current time. We identify our focus verticals in the beginning of the year, and then we, based off of those focus verticals, create target account lists. And we have multiple requirements for these target account lists that we kind of need to follow for it to be worth our time and energy to go after these accounts. So there's a lot that needs to be perfectly aligned. Let's say it's revenue, product fit, how mature they are, just their tech stack and their tech capabilities are also important factors, and other things such as locations and just their willingness to actually implement such a change in their company as well. So there's a lot of things that needs to be aligned for it to be a fit for us.
And you mentioned some things that in my mind are easy to understand, like revenue, the tech stack, right? That's 0 or 1, or the location. You could say, yeah, this industry in certain city. But you mentioned some nuances here, and I would love to know like how you can measure product fit or the willingness to actually make and to change. Is it possible to actually observe these things, paper, or when you are planning your campaigns before you start, actually?
Before we start, that's a challenge. I don't think we'll ever manage to do that, but we do have a lot of accounts that we have been after for a while, that we've had conversations with, that we are following up with years after we've lost an opportunity or had conversations with them. So we know where they are in their stage, that makes sense. And if they are taking in new people, or if they are moving to new markets or similar stuff like that, which can affect if they are a fit right now and they weren't before, for example.
Like that knowledge that could be on salespeople's head is so valuable, right? And the challenge then becomes how you translate that into something that is organized and that you can act on, right?
And you can't do that. It just has to be, you just have to communicate with the sales managers a lot more. But if you align on those target accounts and you have conversations about them and structured meetings and follow-ups about them, it's still possible to track all of that and find the right timing as well of when to reach out.
What about you, Tom? We know that targeting is one of the most important parts of paid media. So with your experience in that regard, how do you think about targeting and fit before an account shows intent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sarah Lee made some interesting points, especially on some of the formal graphics. But the underlying question I always look at is how big of a problem are we solving for that account? Two companies, they can look identical on paper, right? And that answering that question either sways them to, hey, this is worth spend or it's not worth spend. And especially if that problem is tied to revenue and we could solve, it makes it a really good fit. And I think from there, once you've identified those type of accounts, then you could start looking down at maybe there's certain size of companies that fit more towards that, or certain job titles that work at these companies, or revenue based, or et cetera. So that underlying question really helps solve the other kind of factors you're looking at to really identify what a good fit is and identifies the ICP that you're going to target.
Tom, how much of this comes from data and how much comes from human judgment, in your opinion?
I think a lot of it comes from data. One of the things I think we're privileged at here at AudioEye is that we are not a new company. We're not a one-year-old startup where you lack data and it's hard, and you really have to use more data and benchmarks that you find online or any research you do in the market. But for us, we have 20 years worth of data. And for me, even before I joined AudioEye, there was tons of data for me to work off of and find that data and really find what's working, what isn't within the data. It took a lot of that toll away from me from making my own judgments. And I think that's something that marketers face a lot, especially when you join younger companies where you kind of have to assume and you have to take risk and you have to spend money to answer those questions.
And okay, so let's bring intent into the picture now, because intent data is valuable because it can show timing, right? It can suggest that an account is researching a category, comparing vendors, becoming more active around any problem. But one of the themes from things that you're discussing now is apparently it only becomes useful when it's applied to the right account. Otherwise, teams can spend time prioritizing accounts that look active but are not actually likely to convert, or accounts that create noise for sales rather than real opportunities, right? So I would love to hear, why can high intent accounts still be poor commercial targets? Have you seen examples where intent look strong but the accounts were not a good fit?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of marketers can be tricked by intent, because intent doesn't necessarily mean good fit. Those are two different things, right? Intent and fit. So you could see from your dashboards, hey, people are engaging, they're downloading the content, they're filling out forms, lead volume was good, and it's showing intent. But then when you actually look into the data and you start connecting that intent into revenue, that there is no pipeline, right? So then that tells you the fit is not good. So that's a good example where high intent could look good, but it doesn't necessarily hit your bottom numbers. I think that's where high intent can be bad, right? Because it's reflecting the wrong signals if you're not looking at full funnel data. And another example, I would say high intent could be a bad target, more specific to paid media, is that high intent audiences tend to be small, which makes it difficult to advertise on ad channels because either the ad platform doesn't allow you to advertise because it's too small, you got to go more broad. And it's also more difficult to segment and personalize if you're working with a smaller audience.
Yeah, we have that exact issue in the Nordics because we've just started working with looking at intents more closely. And what I do is that I do it the other way around. I identify the accounts that I want to look at intents at, if that makes sense. So with the target accounts that we have, I only monitor intents because that's what's valuable for me to look at. The problem is that they're so small and niched. We have around 40 accounts in each focus vertical, which makes it very hard to get correct data, but also to monitor that and to see the spikes and to see the highlights and the lowlights of that data set, if that makes sense. That's an issue that we have here. And I guess it's what I hear from you, Tom. It's maybe a common issue, but we go more in depth into the account. And what I try to do is that I try to combine the data that I see within our system and third-party data and the data that we can see from LinkedIn, for example, on contact level, and combine all of that data to see if there's any changes in their intent and to see if there's higher intent, for example, and if it's time to reach out to them. But that's a really hard task to get all of that data into one and to make it actionable insights. So, yeah.
Especially if you're going after big accounts, right? Many people complain that third-party intent, especially, is really hard to get real insights from it. If it says someone at Apple in Cupertino or someone at Amazon in Seattle is researching for your account, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Then how can I use this data? And cross-referencing that is really hard, right?
It's very hard, but it's also, you kind of want to see what they did before. You kind of want to follow the changes, because it could be that they have done that prior as well and that there's not really a change in their behavior. So I think it's also both looking at intent, but also seeing if there's something that has changed recently. And as you say, it's hard to trust that data. You kind of want to confirm it with other data sets as well to make sure that you're thinking straight, basically.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about being focused on the 40 accounts that you should target, because your strategy is telling you that you should go after those verticals, and for these accounts, these verticals, then you put all your effort in analyzing the right data. Otherwise, this could be even more complicated if you start bringing third-party intent data into and trying to analyze that and cross-referencing that with your first-party data. So, but if you know the accounts that you want to target, right, and then everything becomes, whatever you do after that is way more effective, in my opinion.
Yeah. You keep a little bit of you keep a closer eye on them, and it's, you know, it more by heart what they're doing, but it's the way we work nowadays because the market is super saturated. We have a lot of great clients already, and we don't have that much to go after anymore, or at least it's much harder to find. It's really niched and highly personalized for those accounts, and same with intent, that we try to follow that very specifically for those specific accounts.
And because a good fit account might not be ready to buy today, but may still be worth educating and warming up and building familiarity with over time, right? And a high intent account may be worth immediate sales attention, but only if their underlying fit is strong enough. And this is where the strategy becomes more interesting. Is not just target the accounts showing intent, it's deciding when to create demand, when to capture the demand, when to personalize, and when to involve sales. So I would love to hear, how should teams bring all this together in a practical way? How should B2B teams combine fit, intent, timing, and on top of that, personalization? How do you engage with accounts and how you involve sales teams in this process?
Yeah, I think you touched on it regarding combining some of those together. I like to kind of create a matrix of, if it's high intent, high fit, that's high priority, right? That's where we're going to spend dollars on. That's where we're going to spend our energy on. And that's somewhere that we will invest in personalization, right? Because there are benefits to it. Versus if it's the opposite, less spend or maybe no spend at all, maybe no personalization. So the priority is lower. And that's the way I kind of break it down. I think for timing is an interesting one because there's two different types of timing, right? There's behavior, whereas is our person at the right stage right now to buy? Are they at the research stage or are they actually looking to buy? And there's also event-based timing. For instance, in the compliance world, if there's a new regulation or a new deadline that's coming up, that will affect their timing. So it could flip a bad fit to a good fit based off that new event. So combining all three or four, you just have to really decide. And what I think helps is defining if this plus this equals, what do you do? And break that down for everything. And that will really help you prioritize of where you spend money and your energy on.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you have those meetings with sales and also the SDRs and just align on the focus that you have. The target accounts, everyone should know of them. Everyone should be aligned and everyone should know what kind of campaigns that you're doing towards them. And you should have just a structure for it. And you should have follow-up meetings where you go through all of the KPIs and look at if you managed to convert any of those target accounts. And that should be an ongoing, just recurring of meetings, of events. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge to get that to work. But if you manage to do that, I think you're doing great. I think that's the hardest part. But it should definitely be your commercial organization should definitely be aligned on what you're going after. And it shouldn't be spread out you shouldn't necessarily have people going after things on the side where you don't know of it and it's not included in your marketing campaign. I know that's going to happen either way. I'm not saying it's such a bad thing, but it's my ideal world. Everything should just be aligned and visible and transparent for everyone. And we should have the same KPIs so that we feel like it's worth putting our time and effort and energy on the same things.
Yeah. But at the same time, so many teams fail at that, right? It's one of our classic topics that we discuss in our podcast is sales and marketing alignment. And I hear a lot of teams struggling to just setting the right KPIs and not having the same KPIs for sales and marketing. And then how can you expect that teams be aligned, right? So that's definitely a challenge in marketing.
Yeah.
And personalization, I think that naturally brings us to AI, because a lot of the AI conversation in marketing has focused on content production, more ads, more emails, more landing pages, more variations. But one of the more interesting use cases is upstream for content in the targeting and segmentation itself. AI can help analyze historical deals, identify patterns across won and lost accounts, summarize those meetings that you were describing, Sorely, the account context, build audience segments, and create different messaging angles for different buyer groups. But there is also a risk. If teams give AI too much control without clear strategy or human judgment, they may simply automate bad assumptions, in my opinion. So I would love to hear, what role can AI play in improving targeting and segmentation, in your opinion?
AI, I'm sure people are not sick of talking about AI yet, but we'll talk about it. I think, honestly, as marketers, we're very spoiled right now with AI and data. And I say this because I remember 10 years ago when I was running programs and managing a marketing team, I would always love to dive into the data and find signals and find what's working, who our buyer is. Because data was never a problem. We always had data. The problem was always we don't have the time to go through all the data to get all the answers that we need for the team. And I think that's where AI plays a huge role right now, where it solves that problem. Now we have the data, but now we don't necessarily need the time because AI can jump in and do something that would take a week of going through data and putting it together and putting it into slides. Now takes maybe a day or two. And that's extremely powerful, I think, because now when it comes to segmentation, when it comes to finding what's a good fit, we could tell AI, hey, go into our CRM, scrape all of our close won deals, who's involved in those conversations, job titles, company, revenue. All right, connect it to a different platform, enrich those leads, give me all the data. And then by the end of it, you have a full scope of who is actually buying your product, down to revenue, down to job title, down to function. And then from there, you could then use AI to actually work on that messaging and the positioning for those specific groups of people. So you could segment and personalize messaging and positioning fairly quickly. Again, something that marketers had to do manually now can be done really quickly. And I think for those, it's super powerful for marketers. And to be honest, I don't think there's an excuse to not segment anymore because of AI.
There's so many workflows and manual things that we used to do that now are just taking us a couple of hours. I do think it's hard to be I don't really trust everything, or I'm very critical of the information that I get, not if it comes from our own system, as you're saying. If it goes into our CRM and just scrapes the information, that's one thing. I've definitely used it for prospecting, finding good target accounts, and that is the quality of those are not the best. I think that's still a very big challenge. Other than that, I've only used AI to be more efficient in my own working processes. I do create gems for like all of our target accounts, not our main ones, just to not repeat the same work that I've done before. But I still think that I'm really a rookie in all of this. I have so much more to learn, but there's so much you can do. But for me, it just helps not repeating the same work and having a place to go to find information of our target accounts, for example, and creating the personalized content for them becomes much more easy when I have everything gathered in one place. So yeah, it helps me be more effective, and it has helped me to some degree to find good accounts, but also I'm super critical of it because the quality sometimes is really low. So sometimes it's more work because you have to vet all the accounts, for example, or confirm that they are good accounts. So it's
I think in terms of being critical is very important. AI to this day makes a lot of mistakes. Sometimes it could do complex things really well, but then it fails on the simplest things, which I find funny, right? It's like a super genius computer that could solve all these formulas and complex business problems, but it can't tell you what the data is today, right? Being critical and over analyzing everything that AI gives you is definitely important. Look over everything, but also what you mentioned about sometimes it takes more work working with AI. And I found that true as well, because I find that you really have to micromanage AI. That you can't just, okay, I trust you, you got to get your work done. You got to micromanage it to the point where you end up asking yourself, okay, this is taking much longer than if I just did it myself, right? So those 2 points, definitely, when you're using AI, you just have to be critical and also keep track of time, because maybe it's better just to do it manually.
Yeah, definitely. It happens way too often that it has actually taken me more time, for example, because it doesn't really get what I want to say, for example.
And coming back to today's topic about how we define fit and why intent can be useful but also misleading, how to combine fit with timing and personalization, and also how AI can help teams segment and target more intelligently. But before we wrap up, I'd love to ask each of you for one final thought for marketers who are still relying heavily on data. What advice would you give them about building a stronger fit-first approach to demand generation? What is one practical change B2B teams should make if they want to stop chasing intent and start prioritizing the right accounts?
I think it's just talk to the sales managers more. For me, that has helped a lot. I think it helps you to understand, as you mentioned as well, Tom, the real challenges of the prospect that you're going after. Just be in the sales meetings with the sales managers and keep doing that, because the changes and the needs of the prospects will change. So it's important to stay on top of that. But for me, that has been the biggest asset to actually learning what the prospects need and what could be a fit. And there's so many times where I think something is a fit and it's actually really not, because of very small nuances that the sales managers know about that I don't necessarily know about. So I think for me, that has been the biggest asset. Just talk to the sales managers. Just go ahead, join the meetings.
I would say lack of time is no longer an excuse. I think marketers in the past sideline or personalization or looking at high intent because of time. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort for let's launch this campaign without doing any of that, right? It's all about let's get it out. I don't think that's the case now. Like I mentioned, I think AI can play a huge role in doing all of those things. So saying that we don't have enough time to do those things because we want to get the campaign out. No, you have the time now, you have the tools. So leverage them and run the campaigns in a better and smarter way.
Thank you both. This was a great conversation. In my opinion, the key takeaways for me is that intent is not the enemy, but it cannot be the foundation. Intent tells you who might be active, but fit tells you who is actually worth investing in. For B2B teams under pressure to create pipeline efficiently, that matters more than ever. Thank you again, Tom and Sarah Lee, for joining us. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of B2B Marketing Futures. We'll see you next time.